He told a Manhattan courtroom he'd come to America for one reason: to destroy the Chinese Communist Party. The judge who sentenced him saw something else entirely. She said he preyed on the very people who trusted him to save them, took their money, and used it to live like an emperor while they lost everything they had. This is the story of a man who turned exile into a movement, and a movement into a machine for stealing more than $1 billion from the people who believed in him the most. Not strangers, not Wall Street, refugees, dissidents, people who thought they were funding a revolution. So, how does a convicted fraudster still walk out of federal court to applause? The answer starts nearly a decade earlier, with a fortune he says he built in China and lost to enemies he made exposing them. By the time federal agents arrested him, Guo Wengui, known to his followers as Miles Guo, had convinced thousands of people in dozens of countries to hand over more than $1 billion. Not for a coin, not for a company, for a cause. And to understand where that money actually went, you have to meet the man he became the moment he landed in New York. Guo Wengui did not arrive in America unknown or poor. In China, his family had become the largest shareholder in the country's largest publicly traded securities company. By his own telling, he was one of the wealthiest men in the country. Until, he says, he exposed corruption inside the Chinese Communist Party, and Beijing turned on him. Chinese authorities accused him of rape, kidnapping, and bribery. Guo said every charge was fabricated, a campaign built to silence him. None of that is settled. What is settled, Guo fled, first to Hong Kong, then London, and in 2017 to New York. That's where he stopped being a businessman on the run and became something else, a cause. He called himself a whistleblower, the one voice the Chinese government feared most, and thousands of exiles and pro-democracy supporters believed him completely. In 2018, he announced two charitable organizations, the Rule of Law Foundation and the Rule of Law Society, and told potential donors he was personally contributing the first $100 million to the cause. Prosecutors would later say that promise was never true, but it worked. Trading on the credibility of those charities, Guo launched an unregistered stock offering in a new media company he controlled, GTV. Then came a second wave. Victims were told they could lend money to networks of Guo's own supporters and receive GTV stock plus interest in return. That raised another $100 million. In 2020, Guo went further. On June 4th, the 31st anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, he sat beside former Trump strategist Steve Bannon on a yacht anchored in front of the Statue of Liberty. Together, they announced something they called the New Federal State of China, an alternative government in exile. Bannon read the manifesto aloud. Guo bit his own finger until it bled and pressed the wound onto the document as a seal. It was theater, and it worked. To thousands of followers watching that broadcast, Guo wasn't a businessman anymore. He was a founding father. 2 months later, federal agents and U.S. Coast Guard officers boarded that same yacht, the Lady May, in Long Island Sound. They weren't there for Guo. They were arresting Bannon on unrelated fraud charges tied to a border wall fundraising campaign. Trump would later pardon him for it. Guo's yacht kept sailing. His movement kept growing. By then, Guo was living in a tower overlooking Central Park. He'd joined Mar-a-Lago. Around the same time, he opened membership to something called G-Clubs, a minimum $10,000 buy-in in exchange for GTV stock. Members got little else. That alone brought in roughly $240 million. By now, according to court filings, more than 1,000 people across dozens of countries had wired money into one or more of these ventures. Exiled dissidents, retirees, small investors who believed they'd finally found the one man Beijing couldn't buy. In September 2021, regulators caught part of it. The SEC charged GTV and its sister companies with running an illegal, unregistered offering, not just of stock, but of an earlier digital currency called G-Coins and G-Dollars. The companies agreed to pay $539 million to settle the case. It didn't stop him. It didn't even slow him down. Weeks later, Guo unveiled the next version of the same idea, the Himalaya Exchange. He went live to his followers and introduced two new currencies, H-Coin and H-Dollar, pitching them as a secure, blockchain-based cryptocurrency system built to fund the resistance. Except there was no blockchain, none. According to prosecutors, H-Coin and H-Dollar were little more than numbers typed into an internal company spreadsheet. No technology, no decentralization, just a spreadsheet, and thousands of people willing to believe whatever he told them next. And they kept believing because Guo kept telling them the same story, that he was the one man Beijing could not silence, and that every dollar they sent was a blow against the Chinese Communist Party. Look at what that revolution actually bought. A $26.5 million mansion in New Jersey, an $832,000 Lamborghini, multiple sports cars for Guo's son, a $2 million yacht. Money meant to fight a regime was, according to prosecutors, financing one family's private fleet of luxury cars. The fraud ran for years in plain sight because the story around it never stopped moving. A new charity, a new stock offering, a new membership tier, a new currency. Each one launched before questions about the last one could catch up to him. In March 2023, FBI agents arrested Guo Wengui inside that same Central Park apartment. He was held without bail as his case moved toward trial. A trial prosecutors said would finally expose what had been running underneath the movement for 5 years. The trial lasted 7 weeks. Prosecutors walked the jury through the charities, the stock offerings, the membership club, and the fake currency, laying out count by count where the money actually went. In 2024, a jury convicted Guo Wengui on 9 of the 12 charges against him: racketeering conspiracy, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. It would take another 2 years before a judge decided exactly what that conviction was worth. Prosecutors asked for at least 30 years, calling the fraud astonishing, and saying it had destroyed hundreds of lives, leaving behind, in their words, a wreckage of families devastated financially, emotionally, and psychologically. Guo's lawyers asked for far less, pointing to comparable cases where defendants received 2 to 4 years, and to scars Guo carried from what he said was torture in China decades earlier. A long sentence, they argued, would only hand Beijing a propaganda win. Judge Annalisa Torres did not agree. On June 29, 2026, she sentenced Guo Wengui to 30 years in federal prison, exactly what prosecutors had asked for. She ordered him to forfeit $889 million, along with the mansion, the Lamborghini, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, and a Bugatti. The judge said Guo preyed on those seeking to bring democracy to China. She said he took no responsibility for his actions, and instead insists incredibly his conduct caused no loss and harmed no one. She said he had called on his own supporters to harass and intimidate anyone who dared speak out against him. One victim, a woman named Wei Chen, told the court the fraud had destroyed her life. Her family lost every dollar of savings they had and fell into debt trying to recover. Before sentencing, Guo did not address the fraud directly. He said through an interpreter that he'd arrived at the courthouse that morning feeling ill and disputed a prosecutor's suggestion he was faking it.
The only thing he said clearly about the case itself was the same thing he had been saying for 8 years. The reason I came to the US was to destroy the CCP. As he was led out of the courtroom, his own supporters, the same kind of people whose money built his movement, stood and applauded. 30 years, $889 million. More than 1,000 people who believed they were arming a revolution and were, in the judge's own words, simply being preyed on. He never once stopped calling himself a dissident. The court just stopped believing him. It's easy to watch a story like this and think you'd never fall for it. But Guo Wengui didn't sell a product. He sold a cause and hope to people desperate enough to need one. If you want to read the sentencing documents or the trial record yourself, I've left the sources in the description. Guo Wengui built an empire on a cause nobody could verify. If you want to be here when we take apart the next one, hit subscribe. And if this story earned your time today, dropping a like helps this channel more than you know.